The dog wouldn't go near the east corner of the machine shed, and nobody could explain why until 14-year-old Wren Castille started keeping track. Beau was 11 years old, an aging Australian shepherd mix who'd spent his whole life following the family around the property without much fuss, the kind of dog who accepted most farm smells and sounds as simply part of the furniture. But that spring, for reasons nobody noticed at first, Beau had started refusing to cross a specific 15-foot stretch of ground along the machine shed's eastern wall, sitting down hard at the edge of it and whining low in his throat until someone called him back. Wren's father called it old dog stubbornness. Her mother thought maybe he'd been stung by something out there once and remembered it. Wren, watching it happen for the fourth time in 2 weeks, started writing down the dates. If mysteries hidden in ordinary places and the wisdom hidden in an animal's instincts mean something to you, subscribe and join us every week. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, we love knowing how far these stories travel. The Castille farm sat in the rolling dairy country of northern Vermont, 60 acres of pasture and hayfield that had supported the family's small dairy operation for 3 generations, milking a modest herd of 40 Holsteins that Wren's father, Guy Castille, managed with the help of one part-time hand and, increasingly over the past several years, Wren herself, who'd taken to the work with an ease that suggested she might genuinely want to keep doing it long after she technically had to. Wren's mother, Colette, taught art at the regional middle school and kept a small flock of laying hens on the side, more for her own enjoyment than for any real income, and Wren had one younger brother, Theo, 9, who mostly followed Beau around with the same devoted attention Beau gave the family, an easy, uncomplicated friendship between a boy and a dog that had existed for as long as Theo could remember. It was Wren's grandmother, Adele, 74, still living in the farmhouse's main section rather than any separate addition, who'd first raised Beau as a puppy 11 years earlier, before handing his daily care over to Wren once Wren got old enough to take real responsibility for an animal. Adele had a lifetime of dogs behind her, working farm dogs mostly, and she was the one who eventually pointed out something the rest of the family had been too close to the situation to notice clearly. "That's not stubbornness," Adele said one afternoon in April, watching Beau balk at the same stretch of ground for what was, by Wren's count, the 6th documented time. "That's alert behavior. I've seen it before, a long time ago, different dog, different reason. Something out there's bothering him specifically, and it's not a bee sting. Bee sting, he'd have forgotten about by now. This is consistent. He's telling you the same thing every single time." "Telling us what, though?" Wren asked. Adele considered the question seriously rather than brushing it off the way Wren had half expected. "Depends what he was trained for, way back before he was your dog. You know he came from a rescue, not a breeder, right? Woman who ran that rescue mentioned something to me at the time, years back, said Beau'd come from a working line, some kind of specialty training before he ended up needing rehoming. I never asked exactly what kind. Didn't seem to matter at the time. Might matter now." Here's what Wren began investigating over the following weeks, driven by a curiosity that felt less like idle interest and more like an actual responsibility to understand what her own dog had apparently been trying to communicate for over a month before anyone in the family took it seriously. She started by tracking down the rescue organization Beau had come from, a small operation 2 counties over that, after some searching, she found had actually closed down nearly 8 years earlier, its records, as far as Wren could initially determine, seemingly gone along with it. It was Colette who suggested the next step, drawing on her own experience navigating school administrative records for a living. Contacting the state's Animal Welfare Licensing Board directly, since rescue organizations, even closed ones, were typically required to file certain records with the state that might have survived even after the organization itself shut down. That inquiry, after several weeks of bureaucratic back and forth that tested Wren's patience more than almost anything else in the whole investigation, eventually produced a single, genuinely useful document. Beau's original intake paperwork from the rescue, which listed his prior owner as a private individual surrendering him due to owner's declining health, and noted, in a brief administrative field Wren almost missed entirely, that Beau had previously received specialized detection training, agricultural application, a category the form didn't elaborate on further. Agricultural detection, Wren said, showing the document to her grandmother. What does that even mean? Detecting what? Adele didn't know, not specifically, but she remembered enough about working dog training generally to offer a starting point. Dogs get trained to detect all kinds of things on a farm, depending on what a particular operation needed. Some get trained for finding livestock in trouble, calving difficulties, that kind of thing. Some get trained for pest detection, insects that damage crops before you'd notice the damage yourself. And some, this was less common, but I've heard of it, get trained to detect certain kinds of gas leaks or chemical contamination, places where a person's nose isn't sensitive enough but a dog's absolutely is. Wren spent the following 2 weeks trying to track down Beau's original owner, working from the surrender paperwork's partial information with her mother's patient help navigating public records, eventually locating a man named Harlan Voss, 79, now living in an assisted care facility roughly 90 minutes from the Castille farm, whose declining health, according to the original surrender documentation, had made keeping a working dog impossible 8 years earlier. Wren and Adele drove out to meet him on a Saturday in May, uncertain what, if anything, the visit would actually produce. Harlan remembered Beau immediately, his face changing the moment Wren showed him a photograph on her phone, a genuine, unguarded warmth breaking through what had otherwise been a somewhat guarded, tired demeanor. "That's my Scout," Harlan said, using a name Wren hadn't known Beau had ever had before the rescue renamed him. "Best dog I ever trained, and I trained plenty over the years. Ran a small consulting operation, farm safety and detection work, for a good 30 years before my hands got too bad to keep doing it properly." "What was he trained to detect, specifically?" Wren asked. "Underground gas accumulation," Harlan said. "Specifically methane buildup from old manure storage or decomposition pockets, the kind that can collect in low spots or near old buried infrastructure without any visible warning sign at the surface. Dangerous stuff, if it pools somewhere unexpected, displacement asphyxiation risk if a person or animal wanders into a high concentration pocket, or worse, if there's any ignition source nearby. Trained several dogs for exactly that kind of detection work, for farms that had old infrastructure they weren't entirely sure about anymore. Scout was one of my best." Wren felt something settle into place, the same specific feeling she imagined Owen Prescott must have felt discovering his earthworm counts weren't random, or Priya Ashford pressing her ear to a well everyone had called permanently dead. "There's an old cistern under part of our machine shed," Wren said slowly, working through the memory. "My grandfather had it capped decades ago, before I was even born. Nobody's thought about it in years." Harlan nodded slowly. "That'd do it. Old cistern, old manure storage pit, anything like that with organic material still breaking down somewhere underneath a cap that's degraded over the decades, that's exactly the kind of thing Scout was trained to flag. Wouldn't surprise me one bit if that's what he's picking up on." Wren brought this information home with a seriousness that finally moved the investigation from family curiosity into something her father took genuinely, urgently seriously. Guy, hearing the full explanation, Beau's original training, Harlan's confirmation, the specific mechanism of underground gas accumulation near old, degraded infrastructure. Called a local structural and environmental testing company the following Monday rather than simply dismissing it as an old dog's quirky behavior any longer. The testing crew came out that Thursday, bringing gas detection equipment considerably more sensitive than anything the family owned, and confirmed, within the first hour of testing, measurable methane accumulation in the soil around the exact 15-foot stretch Beau had been avoiding for weeks, concentrated most heavily near what turned out to be a partially collapsed section of the old cistern's original capping, decades of slow structural degradation finally creating a genuine pathway for accumulated gas to reach dangerously close to the surface. "How bad is it?" Guy asked the crew lead, a careful, methodical woman named Priya Sandoval who Wren noted, with some private amusement, shared a first name with a girl in an entirely different county's story she'd once half heard about from a cousin. "Not immediately catastrophic," Priya Sandoval said, reviewing her equipment's readings. "But it's building, and if that cap continues degrading the way it clearly has been, you're looking at a genuine safety hazard eventually, displacement risk if the concentration keeps climbing, and given how close this is to your machine shed and its equipment, an ignition risk isn't something I'd want to rule out either, not with fuel and machinery stored that close." The remediation work, once scheduled, took just under 2 weeks. Excavating and properly resealing the old cistern's cap with modern materials designed specifically to prevent exactly this kind of slow gas migration, along with installing a small, permanent gas monitoring sensor in the area as an ongoing precaution, a modest additional cost Guy authorized without hesitation once he understood what the alternative risk actually was. Throughout the excavation, Beau, watched closely by Wren from a safe distance the crew insisted on, showed visible, obvious relief once the old degraded capping was finally broken open and properly vented, his anxious pacing and low whining settling almost immediately, replaced by the same easy, unbothered demeanor he showed everywhere else on the property. He knew, Theo said, watching his dog relax for what felt like the first time in months. He's been trying to tell us for weeks and we just thought he was being weird. He wasn't being weird, Wren said. He was doing exactly what he was trained to do. We just didn't know how to listen. Harlan, informed of the full outcome in a letter Wren wrote him the following month, wrote back with what Wren's mother described as the most animated handwriting she'd ever seen from an elderly man, delighted to learn that Scout, Beau, had, even 8 years and one new family removed from his original training, still done exactly the job Harlan had spent months teaching him to do, still watching for a danger nobody else on the property could sense. Wendell Berry once wrote that the soil is the great connector of our lives, the source and destination of all. Wren hadn't set out to uncover a genuine safety hazard hiding beneath her family's machine shed. She'd set out because her dog was doing something strange and specific and consistent, and something in her had refused to accept old dog stubbornness as a full enough explanation for behavior that repeated itself, unchanged, week after week, with an insistence that felt, the longer she watched it, less like confusion and more like communication. Wren is 15 now. Beau, 12 this year and slower than he used to be, still walks the property with her most mornings, and Wren has started paying closer attention to all of his behavior now, not just the obvious alerts but the smaller shifts in his posture and pacing that she'd once simply absorbed as background without really seeing. Adele has started telling Wren more of what she remembers about working dogs generally, decades of half-forgotten knowledge finding a genuine, attentive audience for the first time in years. Guy has installed 2 additional permanent gas monitors elsewhere on the property, near other old infrastructure nobody had thought carefully about in decades, treating Beau's discovery less as a one-time scare than as a genuine prompt to actually understand what else might be sitting quietly beneath ground everyone had simply stopped looking at closely. Harlan visited the farm once that fall, driven out by a nephew, and spent an afternoon sitting on the porch with Beau's head resting on his knee, the old dog remembering him instantly despite 8 years apart, both of them, Wren thought watching them together, finally getting the recognition each had been quietly owed for longer than anyone had realized. What's something an animal in your life tried to tell you that took longer than it should have for anyone to actually understand? Tell us in the comments, we read every one. And if stories like this one mean something to you, subscribe. We'd love to have you along.